Hello, David in St. Petersburg. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview with us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So we'll go straight to our questions.
Yes.
The first question will be, you are co-author or co-editor with Dan Brown of the book Attachment Disturbances in Adults. What is it? What is attachment disturbances, and what are the ways to treat them according to the methods you developed?
Okay, well, that book has 752 pages that answer those questions, so I'll try to be more brief.
Yes.
Attachment is, it's a term in the psychological sense that describes the experience of an infant in connection with his or her caregiver. So ideally, the connection and what's called the attachment bond is something that in a psychological term is described as secure. So ideally, a young infant by about 2 years of age has the experience with his or her caregiver of feeling secure attachment. And what that means is that at an internal experiential level, the infant has a sense of trust and confidence that his or her needs will get met in a reasonable way. We're not looking for perfection in the need fulfillment, but in a good enough way that whenever a need arises, like hunger, cold, being too hot, fear, that the caregiver will be reasonably present and attentive and responsive to try to comfort and soothe and restore a sense of relative comfort in the infant. And ideally, that happens, like I've described, in a good enough way. We draw a lot from Winnicott's notion of good enough caregiving. And that means that, maybe 70% of the time, a caregiver or parent will be able to be appropriately responsive and meet the infant's needs. In that circumstance, there builds the sense of trust not only in the caregiver, but ultimately in the world itself. That a secure attachment bond established by about 2 years of age is the foundation for the child, the adolescent, and ultimately the adult to have a sense of security and confidence in the world. That whenever there's some distress, whenever there's some need that arises, resources will be available from outside and then ultimately from inside to be able to respond and meet those needs. So that's the secure circumstance. In most Western countries, well, actually I'll speak about America, which I know most about. The statistics say that about 60% of adults have what's called secure attachment, and 40% have insecure attachment. So insecure attachment is a very different circumstance. It's the circumstance where by about 2 years of age, the infant and toddler does not have a sense that his or her needs will get met to a sufficient degree. And when that occurs, when there's that lack of trust, that lack of experience that the caregiver will be there sufficiently to meet those needs, the young infant and toddler has to develop ways of interacting with the caregiver to try to maximize and elicit the possibility of getting the needs met. So there are several types of insecure attachment, and each type describes a different attempt at adaptation to the lack of the caregiver being there in a good enough way. So the one form of insecure attachment is called dismissing or avoidant. And that occurs when the child experiences the caregiver as being rejecting, actually actively rejecting of the child's needs for connection. So the child learns that whenever there is a need, and if the child turned to the caregiver for comfort, for support, for somehow getting that need met, more often than not, the caregiver not only won't be there to meet the needs, but will actively reject and turn away from, maybe make fun of or ridicule the child for having the need. So in that sense, the child learns to not go to the caregiver with the needs. The child learns to try to take care of his or her needs himself or herself, and becomes, again, what's often termed avoidant. He avoids the closer connection, avoids the closer contact with the caregiver, tries to become self-sufficient, tries to take care of those needs on his or her own. Another form of insecure attachment is called anxious preoccupied. And that's a circumstance that occurs as a result of when the infant has gone, or the child, the toddler has gone to the caregiver for needs getting attended to and met. The caregiver might be sometimes there and sometimes not there, inconsistent in the responsiveness. Sometimes the caregiver is anxious or preoccupied himself or herself, and so isn't able to really be attuned to the needs of the child. In that case, the child becomes anxious in relation to the parent and has some doubt about whether the needs will get met. One of the ways to try to adapt to that is to actually amplify the presentation of the needs, to become more upset, to be more anxious, with the hope that if there's a greater intensity of the expression of the need, the caregiver will be more likely to be available. The caregiver might be able to, for the moment, forget about his or her own preoccupations, his or her own anxieties or difficulties, and then tune into the infant. So in a way, the distress that the child feels becomes more important to express more prominently in order to get those needs met by the caregiver. These patterns, again, they're established typically by about 2 years of age, and as you would imagine, would persist as development continues, and would show up in adult relationships as well. And those are the two basic insecure attachment patterns. There's another which tends to be a combination of those two, which is often called disorganized attachment. Again, it's another way of trying to adapt to circumstances of experience with the parent that doesn't automatically lead to the needs getting met.
So it's not like it's a direct trauma like yelling and total neglect. It's more about relationship and attunement of a caregiver with a child, right?
That's correct, yeah. I would say though that if there is a lot of trauma or abuse or yelling, like you said, then the degree of attachment disturbance, the degree of the attachment insecurity would be much higher, and most likely would be in the form of the disorganized attachment. Disorganized attachment is typically the most problematic for a young infant to have, and for an adult to maintain, to continue to have during adult life. When people, some of the most severe psychological disturbances, like dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, which is typically very hard for a person to have. There's a lot of chaos in the person's inner and outer life, and also very hard to treat psychologically. Underlying both of those conditions almost always is disorganized attachment. And so we really want to, part of our interest and part of our work is to help psychologists and mental health professionals learn how to help resolve insecure attachment, and also to help parents perhaps resolve some of their own attachment insecurities so they can be more available to their own children, so they can raise children who don't have insecure attachment and are more likely to have secure attachment. What research is finding also related to this is that if a child has insecure attachment, the child is more likely, as he or she develops, to develop a whole range of psychological problems. They're less resilient against the stresses that would occur in life that would lead to psychological problems. If a child has secure attachment, they're much more resilient against the stresses and difficulties that are inevitable in life. And so they're less likely to have psychological problems as they grow older.
So it's not like something that if a child or an individual goes through hardships and survives, he's somehow more adaptive to society. It seems like what attachment science shows us is that if you have this basic disturbance of this type of attachment, it is a major predictor of future problems in adult life, right?
That's correct. Yes. Which motivates us all the more to try to communicate the understandings from attachment science and developmental science to both mental health professionals and to the public, so that resources are available for parents to help themselves if they might have difficulties that would interfere with their raising of children to be secure, and also to help them just learn basic, some of the core ways of parenting that promote the development of secure attachment. And that's one of the cores of the book that we published back in 2016. We describe very specifically a number of conditions that promote the development of secure attachment in children.
As far as I understand, it is a result of a long-term research. Is it correct?
Yes. What we did in this work was explore and consider very closely what many people over the last 50 years of interest in attachment issues have discovered about what tends to lead to secure attachment during parenting and what tends to lead to insecure attachment in parenting. Mary Ainsworth, who was a colleague of John Bowlby, we consider them the mother and the father of the attachment field. Mary Ainsworth was one of the first people to describe clearly the conditions that support secure attachment. And she used the term maternal responsiveness as the foundation for security promoting parenting. And what she meant by that is that she said maternal, it's the mother, but it could be the father or any caregiver, is reasonably available to be effectively responsive to the needs of the child at any given time. It's not 100% responsive and accurate, that's not humanly possible, but again we go to Winnicott's notion of being good enough in that way. Maybe 70% of the time the mother or caregiver can be responsive in particular ways. So we looked at the ways that she described maternal responsiveness. We looked at the work of other researchers and clinicians, and we tried to distill all that has been out there into some very specific descriptors that we think capture the essence of what's most needed. And we call these the 5 conditions that promote attachment security. Would you like me to name what those are?
The 5 conditions?
Okay, the 5 conditions. So, again, these are descriptions that we consider to be what we've pulled together from what many other people have done. We're not saying that, you know, we created these ourselves, but we think that it's very useful to think of them in this particular way. So the first is the child's experience of safety in relation to the parent. And the child is more likely to experience safety in relation to the parent if the parent is consistently able to be protective of the child. A child naturally, quite often experiences fear and distress and a sense of danger. That's fundamental to coming into the world. The world inevitably sometimes presents circumstances that are scary. So when the child feels fear, is scared in some way, hopefully, ideally, the parent will recognize that the child's feeling afraid and be able to be protective. For example, if a young infant is comfortable and content and is maybe playing with the mother, and suddenly someone comes into the room, a stranger, and the stranger is very loud and is moving very fast, the child is likely to become frightened. And if the mother is attuned to the child, she will recognize that the child is afraid and distressed, and maybe pick the child up, hold her close, and maybe take her outside of the room where it's quieter and this scary person is no longer disturbing the person. So that's an experience for the child of feeling happy and safe. Suddenly something happens and the sense of safety is no longer there. There's a sense of fear and distress. And then the experience includes the mother responding right away and effectively to help protect the child from what was scaring her. So you see there's a pair there. There's the sense of safety, and the safety is present because of a certain behavior by the caregiver. So that's the first one. A felt sense of safety and consistent protection by the mother or the caregiver. Second condition, which I alluded to in that description of the first one, is attunement, parental attunement. If the parent is consistently attuned, meaning empathically aware of and connected to the experience of the child, then the child is likely to feel seen and known. The child is likely to develop the experience that, oh, there's somebody, this important person, my mother, my father, knows me, knows what I'm experiencing, knows when I'm afraid, knows when I'm happy, knows when I need something. And again, to a good enough degree, not 100%, the parental attunement leads to that feeling seen and known by the caregiver. And that's very important for developing security. Third one is whenever the child is upset or distressed, the parent is reasonably available to provide soothing and comforting. Okay? That can be in the form of protection against danger, as in the first example. It could also be in the context of when the child is really hungry and is starting to feel distress from the hunger. Then the attuned parent will recognize that the child is hungry and not distressed by something else, perhaps, and will then provide food and nourishment for the child.
And we're speaking about the first 2 years of life, right?
Good question. Yeah, this all happens right from birth, and the sense of the attachment bond, whether it's secure or insecure, is generally established by about 18 months of age. 18 months to 2 years of age. So those first years are very, very important. The third condition is the sense of feeling seen and known because of the consistent attunement. I'm sorry, that's the second one. The third is the sense of being consistently comforted by the caregiver who's available for soothing and comfort when the child is distressed. The fourth condition is feeling valued by the caregiver. And the child consistently, or will develop the sense of feeling valued if the parent is consistently delighted by the child, is happy to be with the child, feels joy in relation to being connected with the child, and is able to communicate that through happy face, through happy sounds, through direct verbal expression as the child is more and more able to understand verbal expressions. And that leads to a sense of being important, being, oh, you know, this important person to me is actually happy about me. And that gets internalized in a really good way. And the last of these conditions that we've named is feeling supported for being one's best self. And that is an experience that develops when the caregiver is consistently encouraging for the child to explore, to learn, to notice what's interesting. If the caregiver is interested in the child, then the caregiver will support the child being able to explore and discover what's interesting to the child himself or herself. And that promotes a sense of security in relation with the caregiver. I'd like to add one other component to this, is that some of the, you may have recognized that these 5 conditions that support secure attachment also support some very important, some other important psychological and emotional qualities of development. And one of them is self-development. Okay? A securely attached child is much more likely to develop a stronger and more balanced and more stable sense of self. And that comes from these same conditions, particularly attunement by the caregiver to recognize the child's needs. When the caregiver consistently recognizes the child's inner states and needs, over time that helps about emotional variability and self-recognition. Also, the feeling valued by the caregiver who's delighted by the child. That supports self-esteem. If you think about it, if the child consistently feels that the caregiver is happy about his or her very being, that's going to increase self-esteem. Okay? And support for exploration and discovery. Well, how do we develop our sense of unique self and what we like and what we don't like? That comes from exploring the world around us, from feeling secure enough to move away from the caregiver sometimes and find out what I like and what I don't like, and to be able to come back to the caregiver and say, look what I found, and hopefully the caregiver will be interested and even delighted by the child's discovery. So that promotes self-development. As we develop, ideally we learn how to not only about our emotions and the different types of emotions we can have, but we learn how to regulate our emotions too. People with borderline personality disorder or some other kinds of psychological problems, they can be overwhelmed by emotions. They don't have good internal ability to handle or to regulate the inner emotional states. If, as a very young child, during those first 2 years of life, the caregiver was consistently available to help the child regulate his or her inner states, to soothe the child when the child was distressed, for example, the child internalizes that experience of being soothed by the caregiver, develops an internal representation, an internal image, we could say, of being soothed whenever there was distress. And what we found is that if that has happened to a good enough degree during childhood, then as an adult, those internal representations, those internal images of being soothed whenever there was distress, helps with being able to self-soothe and self-regulate the emotions during adulthood. So whenever we have a patient or a client come to us for psychotherapy, having a lot of emotional difficulty, overwhelming emotional experiences, having difficulty regulating them, we think about there having been some early attachment problems, and we might work directly in certain ways, which we also describe in the book, with the adult to help repair those early problems so that the internal self-regulation skills can develop, even if they didn't during childhood.
So often an adult who comes to a therapist's office, they have some kind of sort of issue or problem, emotional turmoil or scenario, and often they don't think about the powerful influence of the first 2 years, because of course the first 2 years of life they're subconscious or even unconscious, right?
Good point.
So the essence of the work, which is attachment informed, is about noticing those patterns of attachment disturbances and helping adults correct them in their adult self.
Yes.
So they can improve their life.
Exactly. We find that, as I said, in America, approximately 40% of adults have insecure attachment. But the people who come for psychotherapy, a much higher percentage of the people that come for therapy, we discover have underlying attachment insecurity, to a large degree or to a small degree. Again, there can be a whole spectrum of severity of attachment insecurity. But I should mention here too, I've been referring to the American statistics, but there was a study in 2010 by Natalia Pleshkova, a Russian researcher here in St. Petersburg, who looked at a sample of infants in St. Petersburg, in low-risk families in St. Petersburg. I think it was about 130 infants. And she found that only just under 7% had secure attachment, which means that 93% of that sample had some form of insecure attachment here in St. Petersburg. And very concerning, of course, because these are infants, again, in families where it seemed like there was not a lot of abuse going on, not anything, horrific at all, but almost 93% of these infants, they were in their second year of life, had insecure attachment. And she went on to speculate why that might be, why such a low level of security here. It was very interesting, her ideas. She talked about in the Russian culture and society there being probably a lot of unresolved grief and trauma from events and occurrences over the years. And when a parent has unresolved grief and trauma, that's going to affect their caregiving. It's going to affect their parenting. So that's another reason why it's so important for the well-being of children that parents can address and hopefully resolve whatever type of inner insecurity they may be carrying, whatever type of unresolved grief or trauma from their histories, from their parents' histories, from the cultural history. And that's part of why I like this work so much. It can have effect not only individually on people that come to us for therapy, but the more we help somebody individually who may become a parent, then that's going to help their children to be more secure. I've taught this work in St. Petersburg for quite a few years now, and in one of my advanced seminars that was attended by people who had taken the introductory seminar, I asked about experience of doing the therapeutic method that we describe in the book. And one woman raised her hand and she said she works a lot with foster parents, and particularly foster mothers. And she said that she had found through her work that many foster mothers had come to her for help with their parenting skills and their own difficult experiences that could get activated by being the foster parent. And she saw that quite a few of them have insecure attachment, and she was applying the therapeutic methods that I had taught. And she said that several people had come to her, several of these foster mothers had come to her after a period of sessions of doing this attachment healing work and said, you know, after doing this with you, I feel like I'm loving my children more. And I just think that's so beautiful. That's you know, that it can have that kind of effect. You know, if they're loving their children more, those children are going to benefit. They're going to be more likely to feel secure and grow up to be who they most can be.
So the way Daniel Brown describes the method of correcting this technique of correcting the attachment disturbances, it is a modified version of it is a synthetic method which integrates a kind of meditation which uses visualization. Am I correct in that? Can you, if briefly, describe the essence of the method?
Certainly, yes. Well, the method that we've developed with Dan Brown, there was a group of us that met over about 8 years to explore the field and the methods for healing, and we developed what we call the 3 pillars of effective treatment for attachment repair. The first pillar is what you're referring to, which is we call the ideal parent figure method, and what that involves is this is for working with adults, and we initially help the adult client tune into body awareness. We want the person to not be thinking about the process so much in a cognitive way. Ideally, we want the person to experience viscerally, in a full body sense, the particular imagery that I'll describe in a moment. We want the person to get into the body-focused experience because during the first 2 years of life, when the attachment experience is most significant and during which the attachment status is formed, the cognitive system is not very well developed, but instead the infant and young child experience most things bodily. There's a body-based awareness. So if an adult client comes to me and has an attachment problem, we found that the most effective foundation is to help that adult come back into body awareness. Okay? And from that body awareness, we ask the person to imagine going back in time and come to feel himself or herself as a very young child. So it's not just imagine yourself as a young child. It's not just, picture yourself as a young child. It's more and more feel yourself as though you're a very young child. Feel in your body what it's like to be a young child, to be the young child you are. So we want to have the here and now experience of, in whatever ways the client can do it, feeling from the inside as a young child. When that's established, when the person says, okay, I'm feeling myself as a very young child, then we say something like, now imagine as you're feeling yourself as the very young child you are, notice that you're not alone. Notice that you're with parents, but not the parents you grew up with. Notice now that you're with a new and different set of parents, parents who really know how to be with you in all the ways that help you feel secure and safe and comforted and seen and known and valued for the young child you are. And then we help the client elaborate on that inner experience of being a young child and having parents that are able to be the ways that would be most supportive for developing secure attachment. Okay? This isn't about saying that the actual parents were wrong or bad. We never make the actual parents, we never criticize them or say that they were bad. We just say, your actual parents did the best they could, but now give yourself the experience, and I'll support you having this experience of what it could be like, what it can be like right now of being a young child and having parents who know how to be with you in all the ways that help you feel secure. And then over a series of sessions, we do this over and over, and we help the client elaborate on that experience. And it's remarkable what often happens with clients. They, as you would imagine, it feels so good, quite often, to be cared for in ways that they weren't sufficiently cared for as the young children. They were. But through the imagination, through the inner experiential imagery process, they actually can experientially have a very different experience than they first had as children. And that new and different and positive experience gets internalized in such a way that it becomes more active in their lives, in their relational experience with others, than the residue of what they experienced actually as children. So we call this, we suggest that this replaces the early attachment representations that were problematic and led to insecurity with new attachment representations that are positive and can support attachment security. And we found through our research with this that even though this may take a period of time, depending on how severe the attachment insecurity was, it takes much less time than the traditional methods for attachment healing that the psychological field has developed.
How much time does it take?
We often get that question, and it's very hard to answer because everybody's different. Mm-hmm. But I can say that through the research that we've done, even people with the most severe forms of attachment insecurity, like rather severe disorganized attachment, can develop what's called earned security. They go, if somebody started out as insecure and then becomes secure, we call that earned security. Mm-hmm. So within about 3 years, it's possible to take someone with a severe form of attachment insecurity and have them become secure.
In what frequency of sessions?
Once every week, and then gradually shifting to once every 2 weeks. That's the usual form of it.
And for people,
yes.
people to understand, it is a really a foundational change in this attachment, sort of this yearned, secure attachment. It has a profound impact on a person. So it's not like that it takes too much time, and it's really you can say it's a short-term therapy actually in comparison to what it usually takes for people to work through issues when they're doing serious therapy.
I would say that yes, just qualify that a little bit. It's not necessarily short-term on its own. Again, if someone has very severe disturbance, attachment disturbance, or borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, it still can take several years of, every week, every other week, sometimes maybe even twice a week if the person is in great distress. But as you said, it takes less time. We're finding it takes less time than the more traditional modes of working with attachment problems. I've seen people even in 6 months move from insecurity to security. Now, those are people that didn't start off with as severe a version of insecurity, but still had insecurity that was creating problems in their adult relationships and their relationships with themselves. I should also add that even when attachment security is established, that doesn't mean that everybody is completely psychologically at ease and well and healthy. There can still be issues of self-esteem that need to be or could be worked on in therapy and helped. There could be some lingering residue from traumatic experience that could be important to work on in therapy. So somebody can be secure in their attachment status and still have anxieties and still have poor self-esteem and still have other types of difficulties that might lead them to therapy. But if someone comes to therapy with secure attachment, then it's more easy to heal those particular problems than if they start with insecure attachment at the beginning of therapy. And again, we find that if there's insecure attachment, regardless of what the problems are that they came to therapy for, if we help resolve the insecurity first, help them get earned security, then the severity of the problems they came to therapy for would be most likely less and more easily resolved. So.
Okay, so the last question would be, since we have only a few minutes left for our interview, is that you come to teach to St. Petersburg, and you've been doing it for a long time, right?
Yes, I believe the first time I taught a seminar on attachment was 2012. Yeah, wow. And I've come every year since. Yeah, for that.
How do you find the experience of teaching Russian specialists who want to learn the secrets of the profession? And what is your personal experience? Any peak experiences of teaching here?
Oh, I love teaching here, yeah, for a number of reasons. And one of them is there is a lot of interest in the work. It's always great for a teacher to experience people coming with a lot of interest. And I think the interest stems in part from recognition of the degree of attachment problems that is present in people in the culture here. It was actually during one of those early seminars that I taught here that I learned about Natalia Pliskova's work and about the research that showed that only about 7% of the infants in that study had secure attachment. I didn't, but one of the students in the class said, do you know about this research? And I said, I don't. Well, tell me about it. And she mentioned it and told me about the statistic, the finding, and I didn't believe it. I said, that can't be true. That's such a low level, and how can that be? But I noticed as we were having this interaction about the study, and I said, that can't be true. So many people in the room, and there were like 45 people, were just nodding their heads saying, we believe that's true. We see it all the time in our work. We see it in our families, in our friends, and our people in the culture. So there's a need here. I think there's a need everywhere. But the recognition by clinicians here in St. Petersburg and in Russia for work that helps resolve the rather prevalent attachment insecurity among people, it drives the motivation for coming to learn about helping to heal that, and it makes them interested, and it gives me very positive experience that I can offer something that hopefully can help the clinicians, which then will help the people that they work with too.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation.
You're welcome. I really appreciate you having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about this.